8 years old. If you looked at me that night, leaning quietly against the wall at my boyfriend's party, you'd probably think I was fine, maybe even bored. But inside, something was splintering. I just didn't know it yet. The bass from the speakers pulsed through the floor, shaking the bottles on the counter. Matthew's parties were always like this loud, messy, overflowing, with people who laughed too hard at things they'd forget the next morning. I used to think his chaos was magnetic. Now it just felt exhausting. Matthew thrived in noise. He liked to be seen, the loudest laugh, the biggest presence. And me, I was the quiet one, the one who made sure there were clean glasses, who reminded him to eat before he drank too much, who knew the Wi-Fi password by heart when someone inevitably asked. I stood there nursing a half-warm drink, pretending to enjoy myself while scanning the crowd. He was in the middle of it, as always, surrounded by friends and strangers, a drink in one hand, his other arm slung casually around Dana, a woman from his office. I'd met her once, the kind who wore confidence like perfume, intoxicating, heavy, impossible to ignore. She leaned in close to whisper something in Matthew's ear, and he threw his head back in laughter. That laugh used to be my favorite sound. Tonight it made my stomach twist. "Don't overthink it," I whispered to myself, the way you talk to a frightened child. He's just being friendly. But then the chant began. "Do it! Do it!" Someone yelled. The crowd clapped, laughing. I frowned, trying to see through the flashing lights. Matthew and Dana stood at the center now, the crowd forming a loose circle around them. "What's happening?" I asked a girl nearby. She grinned. Truth or dare? Someone dared them to kiss. My heart froze. I waited for Matthew to laugh it off. He was good at laughing things off. But instead he smirked, tilted his head at Dana, and said something I couldn't hear over the music. Then, before I could process what was happening, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't playful. It wasn't funny. It was slow, deep, deliberate. The crowd howled with approval. I couldn't breathe. The sound faded into a muffled roar, the kind you hear underwater when your body decides to shut down to protect you. My chest tightened. Someone's hand brushed my shoulder, maybe to comfort me, maybe to point me out, but I stepped back, shaking it off. When Matthew finally pulled away, the look on his face wasn't guilt. It was pride, like he'd just won something. Then his eyes found mine. For half a second, something flickered, maybe regret, maybe surprise. But just as quickly, he smirked again and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Relax, babe. It was a dare. Don't be so sensitive." A wave of laughter followed. I stood still. The humiliation burned through my skin, hotter than anger, sharper than heartbreak. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out dramatically the way the movies tell you to. I just turned, walked to the kitchen, and poured my untouched drink down the sink. The fizzing sound was soft, almost mercifully quiet. Then I took my jacket from the hook and left. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. The drive home was a blur of red taillights and empty thoughts. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my heart felt hollow. Every word he'd ever used to minimize me replayed in my mind like a cruel mantra. "You're overreacting. You're too serious. You're too sensitive." By the time I pulled into our driveway, something inside me had gone completely still. I sat in the dark for a while, staring at the front door, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator inside. This was the home we'd built, the one I'd filled with quiet touches he never noticed, folded laundry, stocked shelves, the lamp he said made the room too soft. Now it all felt like the stage set waiting for an actor who'd forgotten their lines. When Matthew stumbled in, hours later, I was still sitting there in the living room in the dark. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. "Arya," he called, fumbling with his keys. "Why are you sitting like that, God? You look like a ghost." He flipped the switch. I didn't move. "Are you seriously mad about the dare thing?" He laughed too loudly. It was a joke. Everyone was laughing. "You should have seen your face, though. You take things way too seriously." Still, I said nothing. He sighed, tossing his jacket onto the couch. "Oh, come on. This again." The silent treatment, really. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, almost detached. Was the tongue part of the dare, too? He froze. "Excuse me. You kissed her like you meant it." He rolled his eyes, incredulous. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It didn't mean anything. You're acting crazy." Maybe I said standing, but at least I'm not pretending not to feel. He blinked, thrown off by my tone. No tears, no trembling. Just even quiet finality. "Are you breaking up with me over a stupid party game?" I didn't answer. I turned, walked to the bedroom, and began folding clothes into a small suitcase. Behind me, his voice rose. You're being ridiculous, Arya. You can't just leave because your ego got bruised. But I didn't respond. The rhythm of folding fold smooth pack became my shield. When I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound was soft but absolute. I rolled it to the door, slipped on my shoes, and said the last words he would hear from me for a very long time. You called me too sensitive for feeling hurt, but I think it takes strength to feel it all. Then I left. The door closed behind me with a click that felt like the end of a sentence and the beginning of something new. I didn't cry that night. People always assume heartbreak looks like sobbing into a pillow. Mascara running, clutching your chest like in some tragic romance film. But for me, it was quiet, a kind of numb silence that felt like standing underwater while the world kept spinning above. When I arrived at Lila's apartment just after midnight, she took one look at me and didn't ask a single question. She just opened the door wider. "Guest room's clean," she said softly. "You can stay as long as you need." I nodded. My suitcase felt heavier than it should have. In her small apartment, the ticking of the wall clock was the only sound. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at my hands, wondering if I'd done the right thing. 3 years of my life gone in the space of a single kiss. I replayed everything, like my brain was trying to find the moment when it all went wrong. The first time Matthew told me I was too serious. The second time he said, "Don't overthink it." The third when he laughed after I told him that his jokes sometimes embarrassed me in front of friends. He'd always said those words with a smile like they were harmless, but they weren't. They were tiny, invisible cuts that finally became too deep to ignore. Lila appeared in the doorway holding a cup of tea. "You want to talk about it?" I shook my head. "Not yet." "Okay," she said, setting the cup down on the nightstand. "Just don't let him make you feel like you overreacted. You're allowed to feel hurt." I stared at the steam rising from the cup, thin, delicate, dissolving into the air. "I'm just tired," I whispered. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, drawing pale stripes across the floor. I woke up to a phone vibrating beside me, Matthew's name lighting up the screen. I stared at it until it stopped. Then I turned it face down. I took a long shower, letting the water run until it stopped feeling like an escape and started feeling like a decision. When I stepped out, I knew what I needed to do. Back at the apartment, Matthew was waiting. He must have stayed up all night, because when I opened the door, he was sitting on the couch, still in last night's clothes. "Finally," he said, standing. "Can we just talk like adults? You seriously left over that?" I ignored the question and walked to the bedroom. My movements were methodical, like I was performing a routine I'd practiced 1,000 times, except this time it was real. I started packing the rest of my things, books, shoes, the plant I'd kept by the window. Matthew followed me pacing. "Arya, come on. It was a stupid dare. Everyone was laughing. You're making this bigger than it is." I folded another shirt. "It's not the kiss, Matthew." "Then what is it?" he snapped. "It's the way you made me feel like I was wrong for caring." He blinked momentarily, speechless. Then with a bitter laugh, "God, you always twist everything into some emotional lesson. You're exhausting." I paused, holding the last shirt in my hands. "Then I guess you'll finally get to rest." That shut him up. He watched as I zipped the bag shut. The sound echoed like the final seal on a coffin. I grabbed my keys from the counter. His voice softened suddenly, turning almost childlike. "You're really leaving, yes. Over this, because of everything before this." He didn't reply. He just stood there frozen as I wheeled my suitcase toward the door. When I reached it, he called out again, his voice smaller now. "Arya, please don't do this. You're going to regret it." I turned around slowly. For a second, I wanted to say something kind, something to ease the sting. But then I saw his expression, the same self-assured smirk that had once charmed me now, just an echo of arrogance, and I realized he wasn't sorry. He just didn't want to lose control. I opened the door. "Maybe," I said softly, "but at least I'll regret something that's mine." Back at Lila's, I placed my phone on the kitchen counter and blocked his number. Then I sat by the window, staring at the street below. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after devastation, not happiness, but stillness. No chaos, no noise, just the sound of your own breath reminding you you're still here. For days, I didn't speak much. I worked remotely, made simple meals, helped Lila with her garden on the balcony. Each small action felt deliberate, like I was slowly rewiring myself. But silence can be dangerous too. It starts as protection, then becomes habit. I stopped answering texts, stopped checking social media. The quiet that had once comforted me began to feel like a room with no doors. One night, while watering the plants, Lila said quietly, "You can't hide forever, Arya." "I'm not hiding," I said. "I'm healing." She gave a small smile. "Healing's good. Just don't confuse it with disappearing." Her words stayed with me. Later that week, I found myself driving past my parents' old house. My dad used to keep a set of woodworking tools in the garage. I used to love helping him as a kid, sanding old furniture, fixing broken chairs. Matthew once told me it was a boring hobby. I stopped doing it after that. Now, staring at the dusty windows of that empty garage, something stirred inside me, a strange longing to build again, to make something that couldn't talk back, couldn't lie, couldn't hurt me. That night, I searched online for a small workshop space. By morning, I had signed a lease for a tiny room in an old industrial building across town. It smelled like dust and possibility. I didn't know it then, but that small decision, that quiet step, would be the beginning of everything that came next. The first morning I walked into my rented workshop, sunlight filtered through the high windows, cutting through dust that hung in the air like golden fog. The room was almost empty, a workbench, a few rusty tools, a single bulb that buzzed when I turned it on. But to me it felt like a cathedral. I placed my hands on the old wooden table and closed my eyes. For the first time in months I could hear my heartbeat. It wasn't racing, it was calm, steady, present. That's what woodworking always did for me. It reminded me that even broken things could be made beautiful again if you were patient enough to sand away the rough edges. I started small, a simple frame, then a stool, then a shelf. My hands were slow, at first clumsy even, but each movement became a kind of prayer. The sound of the saw, the scrape of sandpaper, the scent of pine. It was therapy, honest, quiet therapy that didn't demand I talk about my pain. When I wasn't working with my hands, I was sketching new designs. I'd lose hours in that room, letting the rhythmic motion drown out the noise in my mind. Lila came by one afternoon with lunch. She stood in the doorway watching as I carefully smoothed the edge of a walnut slab. "Wow," she said. "You look peaceful." I smiled faintly. "This is the first time I've built something for myself in years." She handed me a sandwich and nodded. "Feels like you're rebuilding more than furniture." She wasn't wrong. That night, as I locked up, I got a notification on my phone, an email from Matthew. The subject line read, "Can we talk?" I didn't open it. I stared at it for a moment, feeling nothing. No rage, no heartbreak. Just a distant awareness that this was once the person who could ruin my entire week with a single sentence. Then, without hesitation, I deleted it. Meanwhile, life seemed to be unraveling for Matthew. Lila still had mutual friends with some of his crowd, and the stories trickled back to me without me asking. He'd been suspended from work, something about a leak confidential information, a big client, and apparently Dana, the woman from the party, was somehow involved. I listened in silence as Lila explained it over coffee. They were pitching to this traditional company, she said, and Matthew was bragging about their strategy to impress Dana. One of her friends overheard told a competitor. The deal fell apart. Was he fired? I asked quietly. Pretty much. And from what I hear, Dana dropped him right after. I stirred my coffee slowly. Karma's efficient. Lila tilted her head. Do you feel better hearing that I thought about it? Not really. It's just ironic. He always said I was the dramatic one. Over the next few weeks, my workshop became my sanctuary. Every piece of furniture I built carried pieces of my healing, my anger, my silence, my forgiveness. I was shaping wood, but in a way, the wood was reshaping me. One evening, I started working on something new, a live-edge walnut coffee table. The slab was heavy, uneven, marked by deep grooves and imperfections. Matthew would have called it flawed. I called it honest. As I planed and polished, I began talking to the wood the way you talk to yourself in prayer. You're not ruined, I whispered. You just need patience. The rhythmic motion of the sanding block was almost hypnotic. Every stroke felt like an exhale. Every layer of dust that fell away revealed something stronger underneath. When I finally finished smoothing the surface, I ran my hand across the grain. It was warm, resilient, imperfectly beautiful. Just like me. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed again. This time a voicemail, his voice. Arya, please. I know I messed up. I got fired. Dana, she turned out to be nothing. I can't stop thinking about you. You were the only one who really cared about me. The sound of his voice, once a trigger for panic, now barely stirred anything at all. I stood in the middle of my workshop phone, still in hand, as his words echoed against the wood and tools around me. When the message ended, I deleted it. Then I turned the sander back on and kept working. The table took me nearly 3 weeks to complete. When I was done, it gleamed under the workshop light, dark and rich with a satin finish. I pressed my palm against it, feeling the grain beneath my fingertips. There was a sense of completion, not just in the table, but in me. I thought of Matthew again briefly, how he once mocked this hobby, calling it a waste of time. And I realized how wrong he was, because this act of creation had saved me. When I turned off the lights and locked the door that night, I looked back one last time. The table sat there in the center of the room, catching the last light from the window. Solid, grounded, whole. Something I could finally say about myself. By the time autumn came, the silence I'd once feared had become my closest companion. The air in my workshop grew cooler, sharper, carrying the faint scent of rain through the cracked windows. I'd arrive early each morning with coffee in hand, put on an old record, and work until my muscles ached in the best possible way. Peace, I realized, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It crept in quietly like sawdust, settling on wood, barely noticeable until one day you look around and realize the chaos is gone. But outside my cocoon, Matthew's world was splintering. I hadn't heard from him in months. Not directly, anyway. The few mutual friends we still... He'd tried freelancing, but burned bridges followed him wherever he went. The story about the leaked client deal had spread fast, and no one wanted to hire him. Dana, his just a friend, had already moved on. She'd started dating someone else at their firm and made sure everyone knew. It was poetic, really. Matthew had spent years convincing me that I was the sensitive one, the problem, the weight holding him down. Now, with no one left to blame, he was discovering what true isolation felt like. It started small, a text from an unknown number late one night. Unknown Aria. I know you probably hate me, but I lost my job. Dana's gone. Everything's a mess. I miss you. I stared at the message for a long time. The woman I had been months ago, the one who would have written back instantly offering comfort, she still lived somewhere deep inside me. But she was quieter now, wiser. I didn't reply. I simply swiped it away and put the phone face down. 2 days later, another message came. This one a voicemail. Please, Aria, just talk to me. I made a huge mistake. You were the only person who ever believed in me. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I stopped it halfway through, deleted it. By the end of the week, the calls turned frantic, then angry, then silent again. One night I found myself sitting on my apartment floor, the finished walnut table in front of me. My hands brushed across its smooth surface as if tracing a map of my own healing. The apartment was small, but it was mine, filled with soft light, gentle music, and the steady pulse of my own breathing. Lila came over that weekend, bringing food and the kind of gentle chaos that only best friends bring. I can't believe you actually built all this, she said, admiring the furniture. It's like walking into an art studio that smells like fresh pine. I smiled. It's been good. Centering. She gave me a sly look, and completely Matthew-free. I laughed quietly. That too. Then, as if summoned by the sound of his name, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown message. I didn't have to read it to know who it was, but I did. Unknown. My mom said she saw you at the grocery store. You look good. I can't stop crying. I need my best friend. Best friend. The words almost made me laugh. He'd never been my best friend. He'd been a hurricane I mistook for warmth. I set the phone aside and said softly, I think I finally understand something. Lila looked up. What is that forgiveness isn't for them? It's for you, so you can stop replaying what you can't fix. She smiled gently. Sounds like you're almost free. But Matthew wasn't done. The next day, I got another message, this time from Stacy, one of his old party friends. Hey, Aria. Look, I know Matthew messed up, but he's really trying. He's in a bad place. Can't you just talk to him closure or something? I could almost hear her tone the same patronizing pity she'd once used when Matthew and I fought at parties. This time, I replied. Just one line. Stacy, please don't contact me again. That was it. Simple. Clear. A boundary that didn't need an explanation. For a few blessed hours, it was quiet again. Then the storm hit. Unknown, fine. I get it. Unknown. You're just a cold, heartless person. Unknown. You're happy I'm suffering, aren't you? Unknown. You always loved playing the victim. Unknown. You're too weak to handle someone real. There it was, the real Matthew. The one beneath the charm and the excuses. The man who only felt powerful when he could make someone else feel small. I didn't respond. I just sat on the couch reading each message as if it were a case study in who he truly was. Then one by one, I took screenshots, not hard days, that I wasn't crazy, that this was what I had escaped. I titled the folder Closure. Then I blocked the number. That night, I went to bed early. The room was still and dark, the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows. I thought about how Matthew used to hate rain, said it made him feel trapped. For me, it was the opposite. Rain always made me feel safe, like the world was finally quiet enough to start over. And maybe that's exactly what I was doing, starting over grain by grain, breath by breath. 6 months later, I was no longer the same woman who had walked out of that party with trembling hands and a silent heart. My life had become still. Not dull still, like the quiet that comes after a storm when the world finally exhales. The workshop was thriving now. People started commissioning small pieces, shelves, benches, custom coffee tables. Sometimes they asked me why I named my studio Grain and Grace. I'd smile and say, because that's how healing works, slowly, layer by layer, until the rough edges turn into something graceful. I wasn't just building furniture anymore, I was building peace. And then there was Wayne. He wasn't loud like Matthew. He didn't fill silence with noise. He listened. We met one afternoon when he came by to order a reclaimed wood bench for a rooftop garden he was designing. A landscape architect with steady hands and a voice that always carried calm. I remember how he ran his fingers over the wood and said, "You can tell when someone treats the material with respect. You don't force it, you let it breathe." The words lingered with me long after he left. 3 weeks later, when he came to pick up the finished bench, he asked if I wanted to see the garden once it was done, and that was how it began, quietly, naturally, like the slow opening of sunlight through clouds. A few months later, Wayne invited me to an art gallery opening. Downtown, one of his colleagues was hosting an exhibition of metal and stone sculptures. The gallery was small, intimate, with white walls and soft jazz humming in the background. People moved slowly between pieces, sipping wine, murmuring quietly. I loved the contrast, how clean and intentional everything felt, the kind of place Matthew would have called pretentious. But to me, it felt like home. Wayne stood beside me, explaining the details of a bronze figure, how the artist had used imperfections to tell a story of resilience. "It's not about making it flawless," he said. "It's about honoring what's already there." I smiled, resting my hand lightly on his arm. "You sound like me in the workshop," he grinned. "Maybe that's why we get along." And then without warning, the air changed. It's hard to describe it, that instinctive shift when someone's presence slices through the calm like a cold wind. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I felt him before I saw him. Matthew. When I finally did glance over, it was almost surreal. He looked smaller somehow. The confidence that once radiated from him had withered into something brittle. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly unkempt. Even his posture, that easy, arrogant slouch, was gone. He was scanning the crowd, eyes darting anxiously until they landed on me. For a moment I thought he might look away, but he didn't. He walked straight toward me. Wayne sensed the tension immediately. "Do you know him?" he asked quietly. I nodded once. "I used to." Matthew stopped a few feet away, his voice barely above a whisper. "Aria, please, can we talk?" His tone was raw, stripped of bravado, the voice of someone who'd run out of people to charm. I turned to face him, fully calm but distant. "Matthew, I didn't expect to see you here." He swallowed hard. I didn't expect to see you either. I've been trying to reach you, I know." For a long moment, he just stared at me. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression lost. "I ruined everything. My job, my friends, you. You were right about everything. I was stupid and cruel and..." His voice cracked. "I destroyed the best thing I ever had." The room around us faded. I could hear my heartbeat steady and unbothered. Months ago, those words would have shattered me. Now they just floated in the air, empty, weightless. I looked at him not with anger, but with a strange, detached pity. "I appreciate you saying that," I said softly. A flicker of hope lit his eyes. "Then maybe..." "But the woman who needed to hear that apology," I continued, "doesn't exist anymore." His mouth opened, then closed again. I watched the realization sink in, slow and heavy. "I'm not angry, Matthew," I said. "I just don't feel anything anymore. You called me sensitive for caring. But you never understood that sensitivity isn't weakness. It's depth, and you were too shallow to swim there." The silence that followed was deafening. Then gently I turned toward Wayne, who had been standing quietly by my side, steady as an anchor. Wayne, I said with a small smile. This is Matthew, someone I used to know. Then turning back, Matthew, this is my boyfriend Wayne. Matthew blinked, the words hitting him like a delayed blow. Wayne extended a polite hand. Nice to meet you. Matthew didn't take it. He just stood there, frozen, his face pale and unreadable. I placed my hand on Wayne's arm. Come on, I said calmly. Let's see the rest of the exhibit. We walked away. I didn't look back. Outside, the evening air was cool and gentle. I breathed it in deeply, the scent of rain, metal, and freedom. Are you okay? Wayne asked softly. I nodded. Yeah, I actually am. When I got home later that night, I lit a small candle in my workshop and sat by the walnut table, my first creation, the one that had seen me through every phase of breaking and rebuilding. I traced my fingers along the grain, feeling its smoothness beneath the light. The wood had changed shape under my hands, but I realized so had I. Once Matthew's words had made me question my worth. Now I didn't need his validation or his apology to feel whole. It wasn't revenge that satisfied me. It was peace. And peace, I learned, is louder than any apology. I smiled to myself and whispered, it was never about being too sensitive. It was about feeling enough.